Hello. This video is for my friend, and I'm just gonna call him friend. So because I don't want to expose anyone with my videos. That's why I haven't been using the names in my clay figure video, the names that I used to use. So, or that they gave themselves, So I wanted to make a video outside in the garden, but Paul closed both garage doors and I can't open the garage doors now because then I would have to wash my hands again, and I have OCD and that takes me too long, and the sun is going down, and I wanted to talk about what we have just been talking about on Facebook. And Paul is going shopping right now. He saw that I was very concentratedly writing on Facebook, and that immediately made him worry. What are you gonna do? When I go shopping, I don't know what you're gonna do. And that's why he can't sleep at night, and he's really worried about what I'm gonna do, and he's really worried that I might abandon him. And I understand that so well. He suffers from terrible anxiety, abandonment fear, and that's a horrific fear, really horrific, because he doesn't have family anymore. The only family members that he had were his aunt and his cousin Kenny, and his aunt died, and we believe that his cousin Kenny died as well. We haven't heard from him anymore. The phone number that he had is no longer in service. And he was very sick with pneumonia. He was in the hospital, coughing blood, and it was really awful and terrible. And it's infinitely sad, all of this, and I love both of these people too very much. They were very dear friends for me and for Paul. And his mother died, his dad died. He has no contact to his brothers. I have no contact to my family anymore. I don't really feel like they can't understand me. My family, they don't understand how I feel. They don't follow on the way I think. And the same with Paul. Paul's political opinions are also way out there, and it makes it very difficult to find friends, and makes it very difficult for him to accept anyone, and makes it very difficult for me also when I meet people. And like for example, when I like someone very much, like a politician friend that I had, and most people, they just believe what they hear, and then they just repeat what they hear from outside sources, and then I have to correct that. It takes me an hour to correct that often, or longer, and most people don't like that at all. Most people can't deal with it when someone has other information sources that completely contradict what they heard themselves. But my politician friend, she accepted what I said, so that was very nice. So that's really the only friend here in this place where we're here right now, in this community. And then we have one friend in the other community, and we met one guy in a van, but that's pretty much it. And these people are not really close friends or anything. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult for Paul, and I understand very well. So I can't just abandon Paul. No, that's completely out of the question. I can't do that. He's like my dad. So I have to find some solution, that we can get something that works for everyone. That's really what I'm trying to work on right now in my life. I want to create a therapy help center. I think this is the most urgent and pressing thing there is right now. I see unimaginable suffering of animals and humans, and although Paul doesn't agree with me on this, he thinks that people who are cruel, or that's genetic and that cannot be repaired or healed. This maybe this there's a lot of truth in it, of course. All of these things are also genetic. A lot of people have severe childhood trauma and they would never hurt any being. Okay, there are dogs who have been traumatized and they would never hurt another living being. They would never be aggressive in any way. Same with humans, same with all beings. Some would never hurt another living being, no matter how traumatized they are. And then there are others who hurt other living beings. But I believe, maybe I'm wrong, but I believe that those who hurt other living beings, those are not happy beings. No being who is content and happy and feeling good would ever hurt another living being. Even if this is some kind of genetic disposition that will surface in case of trauma. So I think that there are different genetical dispositions that will show up later on as a defense mechanism. So aggression is some sort of defense mechanism. Violent behavior is a defense mechanism. Yeah. But that happens only when the person is suffering, or when the person feels threatened, or in humans when the ego feels threatened, even if there is no real threat. It's just a perceived threat to the ego. And we can heal this, we can fix this. I really strongly believe that we can move in that direction of healing it. It would be, if I didn't believe that we can heal this, then what other option do we have? So I also believe that we need AGI robots that will have to clean up this planet. That's desperately needed. Okay, so there are people on this planet who are very, very dangerous, and we cannot allow dangerous people to traumatize and hurt other living beings anymore. This is very, very clear. No matter how much hurt they have experienced themselves that made them act out in that way. Okay, so there's no excuse for someone to act out violently because of their past. That's what I very, very strongly believe. Okay. But even in that situation, I really believe that healing is possible. And I believe that healing is possible for everyone, for every person and every being, no matter how their disposition is. We had a violent Great Dane in the past, when we lived in LA. Ludwig was his name. When I met Paul, he was hiking with Samantha. I don't know why he didn't take Ludwig with him. I guess because he was worried about the other dogs getting into a fight with Ludwig or something. But when I met Paul, he had Ludwig and Samantha, two Great Danes. Samantha was very peaceful and Ludwig was violent. Ludwig killed kittens, he killed a cat, he killed a chihuahua at a hot spring, and it was shocking. So, but the chihuahua bit him, but then he just completely grabbed that dog and shook him over and over and over and broke his neck. Very, very horrific, all of this. Ludwig was very violent. And he also had bitten Samantha just for wanting to be affectionate with him. And he had bitten Paul many times. He had growled at me many, many times. He was not a very peaceful person. So he was not peaceful. But even with this disposition of aggressiveness, he learned, and it took him a while, but he learned that he could count on me. He really learned that because I was there for him no matter what. And he also loved Paul and Samantha. I know Paul doesn't believe it, but I saw it. He appreciated them. So, but I think he was jealous of Samantha. I think that's what it is. She came into Paul's life later on, and that's what caused this inner resistance against her and the aggressiveness against her. So there's always a psychological reason. It's still not an excuse, of course. So violence should never be tolerated. Violent dogs in animal shelters are being euthanized. And they have to euthanize them, because if they don't, then these animals in the animal shelters will live for the rest of their lives in a prison. And that's much worse than death, in my personal view. Okay. There's a whole lot of people that will disagree with this, but this is my personal view on it. There are things worse than death, for sure. Suffering with mental illness, for example, but at least we're free and we can learn and we can go through life and we can cry through and we can meditate and we can really work on ourselves. A prisoner in a prison cell, that's a horrific situation. So Governor Newsom said nobody should be incarcerated. It's painful. Yes, I agree. But then he also doesn't believe that these people could ever be euthanized. And I strongly believe in euthanasia, very strongly. And I'm not going to call it death penalty. The aggressive dogs are euthanized because they are aggressive and violent. They can't be adopted out. And they're in a bad mental state, and they're suffering, and they're going to be in prison, and they don't have enough people to take care of them and to help them heal. Okay, so that takes a whole lifetime, and even in this whole lifetime, at the end of their life, they might still have some aggressiveness. They might still bite a hand. They do this rubber hand test in the animal shelters. They have a rubber hand at the end of a pole, and they put this rubber hand into the dog dish with the food while the dog's eating, and if the dog bites the hand, the dog is going on death row. Okay. And that's how it's done, and a lot of people criticize that, but if they didn't do it, they could not take in any more suffering animals, they couldn't rescue any further animals. Then what's happening to all the other animals that are suffering on the street? You know, all the other dogs who also need to go into the animal shelter and be rescued there. People take everything for granted. They don't have unlimited space there. And it's a lot of suffering for those violent, aggressive dogs. A lot of suffering in the prison cell, and they're already aggressive and in a miserable mental state. That's not an option. So the only option here is euthanasia. And I strongly believe that same thing should apply for humans. The same thing. Okay. If it would require me to take, because a lot of people will immediately say, why don't you kill yourself first? Okay, I will if that would create better regulations, and if that would initiate these things that I'm talking about. Okay, I would sacrifice myself for that, because I want to see a world without suffering. But I'm not a violent person, and I don't need to be euthanized. Okay, if I want to be euthanized, then I'll be euthanized because I want to, and because I decided it's just too painful to continue like this, you know. So, and I've been at that stage many times in my life. That still doesn't mean that what I say loses its credibility. Doesn't mean because I have mental illness that I'm crazy and that my thoughts don't count. My thoughts do count, absolutely. My thoughts stand on a rock solid ground. And everyone who is not in resistance, psychologically, everyone really knows, even the people that are in resistance know psychologically deep down that I am right about this. Even the religious people know. That's why they get so mad, because my arguments are rock solid. Okay? My arguments stand on helping, healing, holistic living, and ending suffering. Okay, so, and that has much more to say than some outdated, old-fashioned beliefs or religions or customs, social norms, whatever. So what I'm saying is the truth. It's the absolute truth. We need to have euthanasia as a form of crime prevention. Okay, and that's what they practice in animal shelters. And so why should violent criminals go free onto the streets and cause more pain and more suffering when they're much more violent than the dogs who are being euthanized? The violent criminals on the street need to be euthanized. Okay, I dare to say it, okay, because it's the truth. It's the absolute truth, and you all know it. Okay, you all know it. But besides this very strong and very way out there and very lonely political view that I'm holding, but Paul shares that with me, so that's also another thing that we have in common. We have a lot of political, social structure, beliefs in common, and that's very good. And we have love for animals in common. So that's a real friend. For me, that's a friend for life. Okay, that's a soul father for me. It's very, very important that we have a friendship like this. And when we have a friendship like this, we need to be there for that friend, okay? Whether that's a romantic relationship or not, okay? The romantic part that's just an extra that could happen with someone, okay? Or doesn't, The most important thing is that we have a real friendship with someone. That's the most important thing. That there's a trust between two people. Okay, that's the most important thing. So, what else did I want to say? I am going through this myself, I'm going through this healing journey, and it's extremely difficult because I'm borderline, I have OCD, I have very severe mental illness, trauma, and I have coping mechanisms that are attempts of coping. They're not functioning coping mechanisms, like OCD rituals and self-affirmations that go into extremes, and hand washing and all of these things. Lots of avoidance. It's very painful. Avoidance where I can't touch this or that, and then it becomes a whole legal system that is based on irrationality, and then I impose that on Paul or on other people. And it's not easy at all. It's very, very painful. But I don't have any other choice other than to live my life with a complete sober brain. Okay, I have been on pharmaceuticals, I've been on pharmaceutical drugs like Zyprexa and Risperdal and Seroquel and those kind of drugs. One time I tried to overdose with 100 of those pills. I ended up at the Daniel Freeman Hospital in LA. Luckily there was a nice nurse there who helped me through this with a charcoal drink and all of that. And it was a horrific experience. I'm not going to talk about this in depth now. I've talked about it in many of my videos in the past. Absolutely horrific experience. There's a kitty out there. Yeah. And I had 4 other attempts. Another one where I ended up in the ICU. And then 3 other ones where I woke up the next day. So I really seriously wanted to fall asleep and not wake up again. But I woke up again. Okay. And the Blue God and the Papa, they came to me in energy form, and they said, you can heal and you can make something out of your life and you can help other people. So, very important to follow through with that. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to exist, okay? No doubt about it, okay? And we want to run away. We want to run away with anything we can find, with anything that takes our minds off. Sex addiction, that's a drug. It's just another thing that creates this endorphin high, that creates this, all these thoughts and fantasies that take us out of the pain that's underneath. They make us forget for a moment. So we become addicted to that. I personally, I'm not addicted to sexual stuff and fantasies, but I can see how easily that can happen. I definitely can see it. So I know how addictive it is. So for sure. And but this in itself is a good. It is very, very healing also. It's part of our existence, but it can also become an addiction, and there's a lot of people, particularly men are more affected by sex addiction than women. So that's a statistical fact. Women are more addicted to alcohol and drugs and those kind of things, and they can be addicted to horror movies, and I have watched horror movies in the past, and it takes my mind off the pain, so that's why we get addicted to such terrible stuff. It's because it's all about getting your brain out of that pain, out of that childhood pain. We can do it by drowning it out with external horror that we don't necessarily identify with, but that will drown out our personal trauma for a moment, and that can become very addictive to many people. Or cutting, which a lot of people do, or it's another dopamine addiction loop. It's a dopamine addiction loop because when they cut themselves, that pain, that physical pain, will take them temporarily out of their emotional trauma that is pushing up, and they're in so much resistance to it. They're in so much resistance to the emotional trauma that they would rather cut themselves and feel that pain than feel the emotional trauma from childhood. That's how serious the emotional trauma from childhood is. But it wants to come to the surface. It wants to be seen. It wants to be processed. Okay, we have to process it. We have no other choice. Jiddu Krishnamurti, who is Gautama Buddha himself, he had so much trauma that he had phases in his life where he would refuse any kind of pain medicine. He knew inside that any kind of substance is just a band-aid at best and another addiction thing at worst. And that's what it is. He knew. I mean, he's the blue god. He's Gautama Buddha. And he was able to he would just scream. There were phases where he would just scream. Every day he would scream in pain. As an adult man, he would scream for his mama in pain. Through that emotional pain. Nobody even told him to do that, or nobody was there to hold his hand. I think maybe his brother was there in the beginning, but then his brother died when they were in their 20s, and I don't know whether that childhood pain and all of that was coming up after his brother died or before. I think after the brother died. The grief and then the childhood trauma, because his brother and Jiddu, they have been extremely traumatized. They're from South India. They were extremely traumatized by their father, who was beating them and starving them, trying to starve them to death. They were rescued by Annie Besant from England. And it's a long story, you can read about it. Very interesting story about Jiddu Krishnamurti. But he refused any kind of help, any kind of substance, any kind of act out. He just knew it instinctively that's not the path. So there would be days and days and days of him just sitting there and in this screaming meditation. That's what was coming up, screaming and pain. I understand that the average person, most people, it would be way too much to ask for most people to endure this, to go through this. But I'm telling you, it's still better than being addicted to alcohol and drugs, or being in these dopamine addiction loops of any kind, whatever it is, whatever we make into an addiction, because the brain links up relief with that particular action. Any kind of addiction loop leads to more suffering, because it does not address the actual pain underneath. It's an escape mechanism. It's a state of resistance. It's not a solution. The solution is to feel through it, to do the inwardness meditation process. That's what Jiddu Krishnamurti was doing. He didn't really have a name for it, but he was doing this on himself. And there were phases, like long phases, maybe for months and months and months, every day crying, screaming in pain, like biting into a blanket in so much pain emotionally. And they said he even had physical pain, so it can go into the whole body also. Most people would go on morphine, but he didn't. And then he went through it. He went through that ego dissolution funnel. Okay, there was no ego to begin with. He just went through this process of processing that childhood trauma, and he came out the other end. And then he was just there for everyone, constantly. Whoever needed him, he was there for them. And he gave long lectures his whole life. And he left a legacy of healing behind him. Okay, I'm gonna end this video now. Paul is coming back from shopping. Okay, you guys take care. Bye bye.